Hi guys, I just finished grading your discussion boards and I think you guys are asking really good questions. I'm loving the level of insight that you guys are giving me, and I graded them all. I graded them really hard because I want you to ask even better questions. I looked at phrasing. I looked at how your question, like the type of response that your question is going to elicit, making sure that it's really text-based, it focuses directly on the reading. I looked at how your question proves in a way to me that you did the reading, and made some suggestions. And I'll probably continue to grade this like strictly, I guess, to help you get better. And then also I'll do it just for a couple more weeks, and I'll ease up a little bit because I know you guys will be starting to focus on working on your essay. So keep, let's see what to say. Keep doing the lesson extra credits if you feel like, oh my gosh, my grade is a lot lower than I expected. You guys are all on the right track. I just want to challenge you even more. Okay, so I want you all to go in and look at the feedback that I gave you on your rubrics. So I commented about every single one of your questions and every single one of your responses. I filled in a rubric and I made feedback, so I definitely want you to look at it. I didn't add the comments to the discussion board because obviously I don't want to share my scores with the entire class for you, or I don't want to share my feedback with the entire class for you, because that's like, I don't want to call anyone out. But what you can do is you can go into the grade section, and then when you are looking at, and this is my student user, student preview mode is on. I am not doing very well in this class. You can go in week 1, you can see the the submissions that you wrote. You can also see the grade that you earned out of 50. And then down here, if you click view rubric, then you'll see a couple things. You'll see your score, you'll see the range, so 6 was the highest you could get on question 1, and then you'll see the feedback. I wrote the word test so that I could show you this tutorial, and wow, I'm so good at writing the word test. Okay, so you could just kind of go through, and it says specifically question 1, question 2, question 3, the answer to your own question, and then the answer to your classmate's question. Okay, and it will tell you your total, things like that. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of this. And I want to go through, so the purpose of this video is not to show you the rubric, although that is helpful. The purpose of this video is to show you and to talk more about the readings that you guys discussed last week. So we're going to talk about the open boat. We're going to talk about To Build a Fire, a White Heron, an Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, and Editha, although I think that there are people out there that pronounce it Editha. I don't know what Howells wanted, but I say Editha. We will not be talking about Henry James's The Real Thing because nobody wrote about it, and there's no point. That means nobody read it. There's no point talking about it, so we're not going to. So I'm just going to go in. What I'm going to do is kind of like pop into all the questions that you guys asked, that I asked, talk a little bit about some of the responses, talk about the questions, talk about my answers to questions that maybe went unanswered, or maybe elaborate more on some of these ideas. So if you're watching this video and you're like, well, I didn't talk about Editha, I want to I want to just listen to the part that's relevant to me, and that's fine. Then in the bottom of the screen, like probably you can't see it right now, but in the comment section, or if you looked at it on the announcements part in Blackboard, it tells you like at what time frame I discuss certain texts. So if you want to jump around, you can. All right, so I kind of opened up this discussion with the question of how does this opening simile in Editha like, why does Howells do this? His simile is the air was thick with the war feeling, like the electricity of a storm, which has not yet burst. And most of you guys responded in that this is foreshadowing. And I think that's kind of what I was thinking when I was asking this question, you know, like, the electricity of a storm it gives you this feeling, right? And it's really interesting here because, like, Ashton, in your response, you talk about sort of that Howells is picking something we can all relate to, right? We all can feel that feeling of a storm that's about to come, but it's not there yet. Like, there's something in the air, and he's setting the stage for us. I mean, it's partly he's setting our setting, right? If we have the narrative arc, we have setting, like exposition, which sets up the setting, and then rising action, climax, the falling action, and the resolution. And so he's partly setting up the setting. He wants to give us that feeling, something's going to happen. And this could be like the war feeling, like something's going to happen with the war, but it's also foreshadowing something's going to happen with Editha and George, right? So you guys I think you like hit the nail on the head when you're talking about that. You know, we know Editha is a girl who is like desperate to be this glorious wife. Like, I think someone said that she's like dying to be this perfect soldier's wife, right? And I think you're right, and we can see that in her responses. And jumping down a little bit, I mean, we can see that too when Brianna, I don't know how to say your name, you just email me, let me know. When you ask, she meets with a colorist, what effect does this have, right? So and then the response, you're talking about how, well, she's kind of going back to her happy self, right? Oh, yeah, you're right. Even though my fiance's dead, no big deal. He went to war. He died in war. I'm so glorious, right? And so I think that we see this with Editha, and the opening simile really helps to maybe juxtapose that final ending. You know, maybe there's something in that, this feeling of tension in the beginning, but then a resolution that almost makes the reader want to kind of like punch her. Yeah, you guys have some interesting answers to that question. Let's see. Taylor, you've got a great question here. In Editha, how does William Dean Howells with an E unmask the conventional ideas of heroism? And I think that that's a great question, right? I mean, you answer by saying Editha believing George enlisting and fighting the war is going to be a great thing. I mean, I think you should elaborate on that a little bit. Like, let's do that. So what are our conventional ideals of heroism? I think that if we're looking at this text, we see some of that today with like this glorification of the military. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, but it's an interesting thing, and we can see that in a lot of the various wars that we have fought in. And in some wars there was glorification, and in other wars there weren't. You know, like with the Vietnam War, nobody glorified those soldiers or other military personnel who went to war. They were like hated in a sense, but we don't have that feeling here, right? This ideal, or this idea, is that if you go to war, you're such a hero, and Editha believes, and she like buys into that. And I don't know. I mean, my question too is like, does Howells unmask the idea? I mean, is he removing the guise of hero? Because even though like George does go to war and he does fight or whatever he does, but he dies, and I almost feel like the fact that he dies makes him even more of a hero, and I kind of wish that like he didn't go, or that he came back and just like didn't marry her or something, because I really wonder if he is unmasking these ideals. She has these beliefs that if he goes to war, he's going to be a hero. He's going to come back. He's going to come home, and our life is going to be perfect, and I'm going to be like this soldier's wife or whatever. But that doesn't happen, but yet she still ends up very happy. And like someone said in this discussion, she goes back to her perky self, and she still thinks that she gets to be, oh, now she's not the wife of a soldier, but she's the wife of a dead soldier. Still just as glorious. I think it's an interesting question here. I mean, I almost wonder if he's in a way reversing what he intended to do. Okay, Deirdre, you asked, is class difference responsible for the passion that both Mrs. Garrison and Editha have? I think that's a great question, and something I hadn't even thought about, really. And your answer is essentially yes. And I think that that's so relevant to today. I mean, I know that doesn't matter. That's irrelevant when looking at the text. But man, is that a relevant question to today. I think that we can definitely see that Editha is living in this world where everything kind of works out well for her. But George's mother is not. She has strong convictions as to why the war, like she doesn't want her son to go to war, why she's opposed to war, why she might take a more pacifist role. And it's very possible that her lower class status reflects that. And I think that possibly gets into questions of class that the time period was recognizing. You know, we're seeing this booming middle class, whereas before it was sort of like the low class versus the upper class. And now here we have the emergence of the middle class in this time period. And how can that reflect in the text? And we have this. I would say that George's mom is kind of maybe a part of that middle class. And so she sees war differently. She sees war as taking something away, as opposed to where Editha sees war as adding something in. And her status might certainly reflect that. How does Howells use irony within Editha to present his point of view about war? I always think questions about irony are so interesting. Irony baffles me. And here, Brianna, you say it's ironic because Howells has a negative attitude toward war, which can be seen on page 316. And I think what's really ironic about it is that, yeah, we do know, if we look at the little summary about Howells, he does have a negative opinion on war. And I think his opinion is reflected in George and in George's mother particularly, but it's still so interesting to me that George went to war. Why? Why did Howells let George go to war, and why did Howells let George die? And that is ironic that Editha ends up happy and okay when her fiance died in war. And I almost wonder if Howells is making less of a comment about war itself and more of a comment, which kind of connects back to what Deirdre was asking, maybe more of a comment about different people's perspectives on war and how where you sit in society affects your perspective on war. Something to think about. Oh, y'all, it's so relevant. Okay. We talked about that question already. And this kind of is Josh, you're asking a question also about this concept of like why Editha visits the colorist, and you ask, Howells was known to be strongly opposed. Why did he include an ending that hints at a silver lining? Could he have possibly felt similar in his later days? And I think that's an interesting question. I don't know if there's necessarily a way to know, but I do think you're absolutely right. There is a silver lining here. And why? Like, what is the point of having a silver lining if you're so opposed to war? Why not make all of your characters anti-war and make the person who's pro-war get to be the one who wins, and the person who's anti-war get to be the one who loses? It's an interesting question. Why did he do that? Because I think he's making a comment about something else. Matt, you're asking, how does Editha persuade George into seeing war as she does? What tactics does she use and why? And y'all are really hitting the nail on the head here. I mean, Editha is persuasive, and even Taylor, you say she's manipulative. And I think, I don't know. I mean, I've never been a woman in like the turn of the century, but I don't know if she's doing it on purpose. Okay, I was going to say I don't know if she's doing it on purpose, but I do think that she is. She's purposefully manipulating George. You know, she even says, I'm going to write this letter, but I'm actually going to give him time to think about what he's going to do. But no, I'll just wait to give it to him, and then I'll give it to him before he leaves. It's just all a lot of a woman's way to manipulate a man, maybe. So yeah, I think that you guys have answered this question, certainly. What was the purpose of the author ending the passage with a light broke upon Editha in the darkness, which she felt has been without a gleam of brightness for weeks and months. And I think that we've kind of answered this question already. You know, it's a silver lining. It's giving her the win and possibly making a comment on status. It's juxtaposing that darkness that we felt in the beginning, that storm, kind of comparing it to, like Anna, you're saying, Howells set a heavy tone in the beginning, but now we have sort of this happiness. But why? Why give it an out? Why give her an out? It's interesting. Why does Editha describe the war as glorious? And I think we've answered this question too. She clearly is pro-war. And as Alyssa, did you say this? I think so. Somewhere someone kind of commented on the fact that, so we know that Editha is in a sense manipulating George, but it's interesting because society, is that what I can say, has manipulated her into her beliefs, and that might be what Howells is trying to say, is how we might look, as readers, we might look at Editha and we might say, wow, she is so manipulative. Like me, I'd love to slap her. I just want to slap some sense into her. But maybe she represents propaganda. Maybe she represents like the news, or something like that. I don't know. Oh, it's so interesting. When George says to Editha, if anything happens, I want you to help my mother out. Why do you feel George was so adamant that Editha visit his mother if something were to happen? This is a good question. And I don't really know. Why does George want his mother to be taken care of? I think it connects back to this concept that Deirdre asked before about class. You know, his mother needs to be taken care of because she can't take care of herself. Maybe that's a financial thing. Maybe the question is, what does he mean by help my mother out? Is it financial? Is it not financial? Does George go to war for financial reasons? Can we even really know that? But if he does, that certainly speaks to class. And you know, he helps his mom, so he wants someone to keep helping her. I don't know. Alyssa, following the death of her partner, why do you think the task of traveling across country to visit George's mother buoyed her up instead of burdening her? I think this is another interesting question. I mean, she is a woman who has a path and a plan, and her plan was for her fiance to go to war and to come home and for them to live a glorious life together, but she doesn't get to fulfill that role because he dies, so she needs to have another path that makes her feel just as glorious. And I think it's like saying, you exist to, how can I phrase this? You need to have a purpose in life. And for her purpose is to make sure that she feels good about herself, I think. And if she can't feel good about herself because she married a soldier who went to war and sacrificed, then she has to feel good about herself because now she is helping the widowed mother of a dead soldier live out the rest of her days happily. I think there is something in that, Alyssa, and you kind of respond, I think, talking about her idealization, and about how much Miss Garrison seems to just not want her help, which is understandable because in the way she saw the letter, right? So she knows that Editha manipulated her son. Ashton, how is it that Editha has the attitudes that she has about war when the people in her life do not seem to be supportive of it, right? Because her mother says, I hope he doesn't go to war. If she's ever communicated with Mrs. Garrison, then she obviously knows that she's against war. Her fiance herself is against war. And so I think this comes back to just that concept that we talked about when we were discussing manipulation and persuasion, and how she has been so influenced by today we would use the word media, by the overwhelming majority of the voice in society that says war is glorious and you should sacrifice for your country. Angela Harris, why do you think Editha felt the need to write George a letter after she already expressed her feelings, and why sign it in all caps? And you said she means business, right? She is like, look, George, you're gonna do this, and I don't care what you say, and if you don't do this, I'm not gonna marry you. That is like an ultimatum, right? She is legitimately giving George an ultimatum. And I think it's, like you said, it's a way for her to solidify that she is truly behind this 100%. Final question. How does the yellow journalism of the period that Howells is critiquing and I guess you mean the people of the time, their attitude towards war parallel the idealized and fictional expectations towards romance between Editha and George? That is a heavy question. So yellow journalism is kind of like our version of fake news, our version of propaganda. I think Howells is certainly critiquing that. I think that the yellow journalism was like very pro-war, go to war, sacrifice for your country, be wonderful, be glorious. And it's really a parallel between Editha's mindset, truly. Okay, so y'all did an awesome job questioning this text, and I hope you enjoyed reading the text. I liked it. Let's look at an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. I really liked reading this story. It was not what I was expecting. Okay, Deirdre, you're asking, in Bierce's story, Peyton, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, describes his watch like the stroke of a blacksmith's hammer, and the intervals of silence grew progressively longer, the delays becoming maddening. How does his hallucination of a brave escape make the inevitable worse for the reader? Man, that's a great question. I guess it's like we think he's going to get away, right? And depending on how well you read into it, he is a plantation owner. And so I think that Bierce makes him die for that reason. But if you were just like he's our protagonist, whether we like him or not. So if you're pro-protagonist, then you're like, come on, guy, you can get it, you can make it. But then by him almost getting away, but realizing, wow, he was hanging there the whole time, kind of, I think it changes our perspective. The fact that he was a I think obviously there's a parallel between slavery and hangings and what is going on with Peyton, the fact that he's being hanged, I think is the word. So his hallucination almost does make it worse because we wanted him to get away, didn't we? Did we? I don't know. All right, so my question is about these words, right? And I think that when we're looking at text and we see a lot of similar words, we're starting to build a motif, and that's like this repetitive image. And here I saw like oscillating, spinning, vortex, world. So there's a lot of this going on, but when he's in the water. So when he's going through that hallucination, and what does that foreshadow? And I think all of y'all answered the way that I wanted you to answer. And so it's like, hey, this tells us, if we're really paying attention to Bierce's language, it almost tells us that he isn't escaping. So it's almost like then, to answer Deirdre's question, it might not make it worse, because if we're really carefully reading, we might know the whole time that he's still up there and he's still hanging out. Sorry, I shouldn't make jokes. Okay, so I guess that's really how you guys all answered. Although Josh, you kind of talked a little bit about relief, right? His brain is overcome with adrenaline, relief from the reality that he's going to die. He's spinning, but yeah, you're right. Like, we think he makes it into the water, but actually he's hanging. And so maybe this vortexy feeling is just like, it's all just swirling together at this point. Yeah. Okay. Josh, you asked, what does the water symbolize? I mean, I think it can symbolize so many things. So Seth, you responded, the water in this narrative can represent many things. Yeah, I agree. In one instance, the water represents the slowing passage of time. Okay, so, how can water represent that? I think that's certainly a great answer. The creek could represent life itself. It is the method to which he shall survive or doesn't. It can also represent freedom. It protects him. And it's sort of like a pathway. I almost wonder if the water symbolizes like his path toward death. And someone else asks a phenomenal question that I think really relates to this. Who is it asking this question? Anna, you asked, why do you think that Bierce chose to strategically, yes, absolutely, place the memory of Peyton's wife at the end of his long journey to death? And it's interesting too, because in that memory, she's wearing white, which can often represent purity, and there's sort of like this glittery goldness happening. And it's for me, like, Now, here's an ethical question, like, is he going to the pearly gates? I don't know. But I think it's like this place that's beyond. So it may be the water can represent his passage to that place. Seth, you asked, how does Bierce distort time in the story, and what's the significance of the ticking watch and the driftwood moving so slowly? And I think that's a great question. I don't know, but Lee says he's using time as a symbol. I think the significance, Lee thinks the significance of the watch ticking is almost like foreshadowing for the ending, where it says swung gently from side to side. So maybe this watch is almost like a pendulum, right? Where the pendulum represents like tick, 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 but then we also have this swinging of the rope. So I really think Bierce is trying his hardest, and you guys have convinced me that Bierce is trying his hardest to tell us that he's not in the water, he's not on the bank, he's not with his wife, he's hanged. Josh, you asked, in his story, how does Bierce use descriptions of the bridge scene and the observing men to describe his own, I'm guessing you mean Bierce's own, reverence of death and war? And you quote, and many people quote this beautiful line in Bierce's text, death is a dignitary who, when comes announced, is to be received with formal manifestations of respect, even by those most familiar with him. I mean, that really digs into some type of authorial perspective here, right? Josh, you respond to your own question and you say that he relates death as a friend or foe, almost like to someone who just absolutely must be respected. And it tells me that Bierce has an interesting perspective on Peyton and Peyton's role. It's like he's not trying to be he's not overly condemning Peyton, which is interesting. You know, we're in the time period that is immediately post the Civil War, right? So we have a lot of differences of opinion, I think, on slavery. I would have to know more. Well, not that it was about more than that, of course, you know, whatever. I'm not good at history, but whatever. But there's a lot of differences of opinions on that. And I think that Bierce is interestingly reflecting the question that the Civil War was attempting to answer. Brianna, I don't know, email me, tell me. What does the effect of Bierce's use of flashback in part 2 have? So I can't remember part 2, so I'm going to look at your answer. The use of flashbacks is to show how Peyton is able to use his imagination to temporarily escape time. Okay, so this part 2 is the water part, I'm thinking. This is his way of coping with the situation that he's involved in. And I think you're right, it's like, what's interesting is this concept of time, this concept of distorting time. You know, all of the details that Bierce includes in Peyton's escape take a really long time, not just because I'm a slow reader, but because the process of going down the river, of getting to the bank, of seeing the wife and all these things takes time. But the fall of a body at the end of a noose doesn't take much time at all. And so it is very interesting that he has this imaginative scene here. And the question then becomes, when does this scene actually take place? Does this scene take place before the board is removed and before the drop? Or does this scene take place as he's dying? Or is this just Bierce's way of providing, like giving us hope and then taking it away from us? You know, when is this happening? And I think that, like, my interpretation is that because Bierce consistently uses these words that mimic this swinging and this rotating and this cyclical motion, I feel like the scene is taking place after the drop, this imagination. So I don't know if he's escaping. It's like, is he escaping what's about to happen? Is he escaping, like, what do you mean when you say escape time? That's interesting. So what is he really escaping here? Kaylee. Yeah, Kaylee. Let's see here. Lee, you asked, why do you think Bierce used words like gleam, matchless grace, ineffable joy to describe certain things? I don't know. But you said to show the true beauty of what was actually being described. Which I did, like, that's great. Death is, and Bierce in a previous question, Bierce, we can see, does have this belief about death, right? That it is something to just be in awe of almost, and that death is beautiful. So we have this glimmery, this shimmeriness, right, in his description. And I think that speaks to that as well. Kaylee, you asked, why do you think the author chose to wait to reveal the death until the end? No one answered this question, so I think I will. I don't know. But what if, I'll ask a question and you can answer it. By giving us hope and then removing it, like stealing it away, the hope that he will actually be able to see his wife again, his kids are up there playing, and then taking that away, what does that reflect from pre-Civil War? I feel like there's a connection there. I feel like there's something about removing someone's hope, taking away all of their dreams. I don't know. It gives the reader a very interesting feeling. He's trying to evoke an emotional response here. Anna, what do you think? Oh, we already answered this question. Alyssa, what is the significance of Peyton finally reaching his home and greeting his wife? And so this is very similar to Anna's question, why is his wife at the end of the journey? And I feel like that's just a reflection of the end location. Like, I feel like that's Bierce's way of saying he's of mimicking heaven in some way. But would Peyton go to heaven? I don't know. I mean, can we know? I don't know. Alyssa, you asked, what is the significance of Peyton finally reaching? I just read that. Angela, why do you think that Bierce placed this passage in the story? Okay, and so we kind of talked about this again. You quoted that beautiful line about death and about how death should be respected, and I think that that's really just to reflect again. Well, you guys think that that's to reflect Bierce's own perspectives on death. Which is interesting because I think that we have now two readings that don't necessarily agree possibly with the concept of war. Alexander, in the story, the main plot device is the time dilation. Yes, it is. Why is the use of this device, why does it have so much impact on the reader? And you're mentioning that, we can see it in a number of places. And I think that when we mess with time, we mess with logic. And when we mess with logic, we are making an author who's messing with your logic is making a statement and in that moment about whatever it is that they're messing with. So interesting question. All right, let's keep going, y'all. Go to the top. I'm trying to talk less. So I love this author. I love Sarah Orne Jewett. She writes A Country of Pointed Firs. If you have extra time and you want to read it, it's a whole book. It's really good. All right, Josie, you asked, what does the white heron symbolize in the story? Man, that's a great question. You responded that it puts focus on Sylvia. Kind of walk through Sylvia's story. The white heron is used to symbolize the antithesis of the hunter, the opposite of the hunter, good versus evil, nature versus man. Yeah, I think those are big, big themes here. I think an interesting question is, why is the heron white? Okay, yes, herons are white, but why doesn't Jewett just say a heron? Why doesn't Jewett say the heron? Why does she say a white heron? I think that, as I read this, I probably interpreted it a lot differently than you guys did, and in a different way, just because I don't know. I think that the white part of this is that, traditionally white is used to represent purity, and Sylvia is a young girl, right? And so I think that she is pure, and I truly would interpret this to say pure in not just that she's innocent and she's a young girl, but I think pure in terms of sexuality. And the hunter makes her an offer and she declines it. The hunter offers her money. Maybe the question too could be what does the money represent? Can the money represent anything? I mean, the money can represent a new chapter in her life. And I think that Jewett might totally not be meaning this, but this is my interpretation, that in addition to the heron symbolizing all of these things, Josie, the way you've interpreted this is phenomenal. I love it. I think you've absolutely answered the question, asked a great question, answered with a great response. But also, I'm wondering if this is a story about retaining your innocence and not giving it up. And yes, I mean it in that way, and not giving it up so quickly, because she is a girl and the hunter is a boy, as hunters are, and he's hunting purity. And there's something there. There's something that's more sexual than anyone probably interpreted it to be. Okay. In my interpretation, you can tell me I'm wrong. That's cool. I don't care. Joshua, you asked, Jewett relates the hunter to a boy that Sylvia had Sylvia, I don't remember, had previously known. Are the relationships between game hunters and herons similar to the relationship between a girl and non-animal outsiders, such as traveling hunter and the bully? I think that's a good question. I don't know. It seems like it, right? It seems like there is this hunter-hunted, innocent creature versus violent possessor. But I don't necessarily know. I don't know. You guys can, let me know what you think. But I don't necessarily know if Jewett is trying to make that argument about violence. But it's interesting that she talks about the girl knowing a bully. I don't know. Things to think about. What is the significance of Jewett referring to the man as the hunter or the stranger rather than giving him a name? I mean, this is a great question. I don't know. I hadn't even thought about this, right? But I almost wonder if it relates, and we haven't talked about this yet, but I almost wonder if it relates to the fact that, similarly to the question in Jack London's story, he doesn't give that guy a name, although somebody argues that he does. But it might just come back to this idea that Josie was talking about here, man versus nature, good versus evil. It's going to maybe not giving the hunter/stranger a name could mean that he's anyone. It's not a specific person. It is a concept. I asked a question. I don't remember this. How could this text be read as a coming of... I already answered this. As a coming-of-age story with a feminist perspective. What about with an anti-feminist perspective? I mean, I think that that when the girl climbs the tree, she is, in a sense, that's like her climactic experience, where she's reached adulthood. And feminist perspective, anti-feminist perspective, she doesn't give in to the hunter, is for me the anti-feminist perspective, right? The feminist perspective. She is staying true to who she is and not following the path of the money, the boy, whatever. I don't know about the anti-feminist perspective. Is there one? I don't know. Anderson, you asked, would Sylvia's life have been better if she would have taken the deal with the hunter? I don't know. I think this question is really hypothetical and speculative. I'm not sure that we can know the answer to this question. I mean, we can assume, but that's really subjective. Is your life better if you stay true to your ethics, or is your life better if you take the money? I'm going to go with money, but I don't really know. Just kidding. Ashton, what does the lone old pine tree represent in the story, and how does the author use it? And you talk about it being a beacon, right? Like this kind of culmination of the girl, Sylvia, coming to find an answer in a way that she's looking for and deciding what to do with that answer. You say she knows if she climbs the tree, she has a good chance of discovering the home of the heron. As she climbs the tree, she feels loved by the tree. I think this represents self-love in a way. As though the tree itself is delighting in her climb and helping her on her ascent, like she's going places, right? She's triumphant. I mean, this is an epic moment in her life. And she decides to keep the secret. The ascent of the tree is used to symbolize gaining perspective. And I think that maybe in a different yet similar way, we're talking about the same thing in our interpretation. For me, that perspective is very much like womanhood. But it could be any perspective, right? It could be a number of things, and it really just depends on how you interpret this text. Alyssa, for what personal reason does Sylvia not share with the hunter that she's seen the white heron that she was searching for? It's a good question. I think it's kind of answered here, maybe in Ashton's response. It's like she has this knowledge that she doesn't want to share with anyone because she knows, and maybe it's answered up somewhere else as well, because like she knows it's going to hurt the heron. She's keeping that purity, right? She's keeping the purity of the heron, and in a sense, she's keeping her own purity. Okay. Quishon, is that how I say your name? Let me know. It seems as though Sylvia and the hunter have a lot in common. Even though she felt comfortable with the hunter, why did she not decide to tell the location? And I think that this kind of answers asks a similar question that Alyssa's getting at here. Like, why keep the secret? Why not share the location? Why not give the $10? And you say that although she's younger, she spent her days observing, being one with nature. Again, it gets back to man versus nature, woman versus nature. In fact, she's startled when she hears the whistle. She's horror-stricken. Religion could, okay, this is interesting. Religion can play a part in the analysis of the story, as the hunter could be looked upon as having devilish traits. And I think that that's really interesting, right? You know, we have this possible story of Eden. Okay, so maybe this is her paradise. Maybe this is her Eden, this nature location. And here we have this man, this is temptation, right? Do I take the money and break my connection with the natural world? Or do I remain pure? I mean, y'all, I'm telling you, there's something sexual here. Do I remain pure and keep my connection with this white heron? Yeah, I think that that's a great question and answer. And so it sounds like what you're saying here is that she wants to keep that connection. She wants to stay pure. She doesn't want to give it up. Okay. I think that that's everything in a white heron. So we have two more to talk about. Jack London to build a fire, Stephen Crane the open boat. These are our very hyper... Damn it. Sorry if you heard